Have you ever thought that victory doesn't just belong to the fastest trigger, but to the one who plays the smartest game? Imagine a showdown where three gunslingers stand ready, hands hovering over their holsters, but only one of them knows. This fight was over before it even began. A single shot will fire. No one will even flinch. And that's when you'll realize who had the real power all along. But the real twist is yet to come. You won't want to miss this story. But before moving forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty, barren landscape. A hot wind swept through the air, kicking up swirls of sand around three men standing in a perfect triangle, each one staring the other down, fingers twitching near their holsters. At the center of it all was Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, the legend. His poncho swayed slightly in the breeze, cigar clenched between his teeth, eyes cold as steel. He had been in countless gunfights before, but this was different. Across from him stood Angel Eyes, a ruthless, calculating killer, his gaze sharp, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then there was Tuco, unpredictable, desperate, his sweat-soaked fingers hovering near his gun. No words were needed, no negotiations. Only one man would walk away alive. The world seemed to hold its breath. A single bead of sweat trickled down Tuco's forehead. Angel Eye's fingers flexed, inching closer to his revolver. Clint, calm as ever, barely moved. He didn't need to. He had already made his decision. The silence was deafening. The moment stretched on for eternity. And then, bang! The world seemed to freeze. Time stretched, hanging in the balance like a loaded gun, cocked and ready. The only sound was the whispering wind cutting through the cemetery, rustling the dry grass and dust around their boots. Clint Eastwood stood still, his eyes sharp, calculating, unshaken. He had been in situations like this before, where death and survival were separated by mere milliseconds. But this was different. This was the ultimate showdown. Across from him, Angel Eyes was like a coiled rattlesnake, waiting, watching, his fingers flexing near the grip of his revolver. His reputation was built on cold-blooded precision. He never missed. To Clint's side, Tuco was breathing heavy, sweat rolling down his temple. He was reckless, unpredictable, but even he knew one wrong move here meant death. The tension was unbearable. Who would make the first move? Their eyes flickered between each other, each man trying to predict the other's decision. The air was thick with anticipation, like a silent drum roll before the explosion. Angel Eye's fingers twitched. Was this it? Was he about to draw? Tuco's grip tightened. Was he going for his gun? Clint didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even flinch, because Clint had already won. And then, bang! A single gunshot shattered the silence. Dust flew from the ground. A body jerked violently. Someone had fired. But who? And more importantly, who had fallen? The explosion of the gunshot shattered the silence like lightning splitting the sky. The echo of the shot bounced off the tombstone, swallowed quickly by the endless desert stretching beyond the graveyard. A flock of crows, startled by the sudden violence, took off in a chaotic swirl of black feathers, their cries piercing the thick air. And then, as quickly as it happened, everything fell into silence once more. One man had fired. One man had fallen. Dust swirled violently where the bullet had struck, but for a moment, it wasn't clear who had been hit. Tuco's body remained frozen, his hand gripping his revolver so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted wildly, searching, his chest rising and falling in panicked breaths. Angel Eyes, however, wasn't so lucky. A sharp gasp escaped his lips as his body staggered back, his dark, predatory eyes widening in shock. He barely had a second to comprehend what had happened before his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the dirt with a heavy thud. His revolver slipped from his grip, clattering against a nearby tombstone, his hand weakly reaching for it before the strength left his fingers completely. He tried to speak, maybe to curse, maybe to plead, but no words came. His body went still, and his lifeless eyes stared up at the unforgiving sky. It was over. Clint Eastwood didn't move right away. He stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of his revolver, his expression unreadable, his poncho barely shifting in the hot wind. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, just the quiet understanding that another battle had been fought, another enemy had fallen, and the world would move on just the same. Then, finally, he turned. His sharp gaze landed on Tuco, who was still gripping his gun, his breath uneven, his face twisted in confusion and frustration. He hadn't even fired. He had been ready, desperate to survive, but in the moment of truth, his gun had failed him. Or so he thought. You set me up, Tuco finally stammered, his voice hoarse. His heart pounded so hard in his chest it felt like it would burst. Clint's expression remained unreadable. He took a slow step forward, lowering his revolver just slightly, but not completely. There was still unfinished business. You think I'd trust you with a loaded gun? Clint finally said, his voice calm, almost amused. The realization hit Tuco like a punch to the gut. His eyes widened as he suddenly yanked his revolver from his holster, desperate to check. And sure enough, the chambers were empty. Clint had emptied them before the duel even began. Tuco's grip on the gun loosened. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. He had never even had a chance. Clint had planned everything. The standoff, the tension, the entire setup. He knew exactly how this would end before it even began. Angel Eyes had been a killer, ruthless and efficient, but Clint was something else entirely. He wasn't just a gunslinger. He was the one who always walked away. As the truth settled over Tuco like a heavy shadow, Clint finally took a step back, his revolver spinning once in his fingers before he smoothly holstered it. But the game wasn't over yet, because there was still one last thing left to do. The graveyard stood still, holding its breath as Clint Eastwood took slow, measured steps toward Tuco. The sun blazed overhead, casting long, sharp shadows that stretched across the cracked earth. Somewhere in the distance, the faint whistle of the wind hummed like the last notes of a fading tune. Tuco was still in shock. His fingers trembled as they gripped his now useless revolver. His breath came in short gasps, his mind racing, trying to piece together how he had been played so perfectly. "You dirty," he began, but Clint cut him off with a simple look. Not angry, not amused, just certain. With one swift motion, Clint pulled out his gun again. Tuco barely had time to react before, bang! Tuco flinched, his heart leaping to his throat. But the bullet hadn't hit him. Instead, it struck the thick rope tied to the wooden beam above the nearest grave, a noose meant for a hanging. The force of the shot snapped the rope instantly, sending it tumbling to the ground in a cloud of dust. Tuco's eyes flickered up, following the cut rope, then back to Clint, who stood tall and still, gun smoke curling in the air. It was clear what this meant. Clint had no intention of killing Tuco, but he wasn't going to make things easy for him either. "There's your share, Tuco." Tuco turned sharply, and his gaze landed on a single unmarked grave, the one filled with gold, the legendary treasure they had all been after. It was real. It was right there. But there was a catch. If you can get to it, Clint added casually, stepping backward. And that's when Tuco realized. Clint was leaving him stranded just far enough from the gold to make it a challenge. He had the treasure within sight, but not within reach. "You son of a... Clint, get back here!" Tuco roared, stumbling forward. But Clint was already walking away. His job was done. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust as he made his way toward the horizon, his silhouette fading against the golden sun. No dramatic farewell, no turning back, just the slow, steady rhythm of his steps. The legend of the good, the bad, and the ugly wasn't just about who had the fastest draw. It was about who understood the game best. And Clint always knew how to win. The final notes of Ennio Morricone's iconic score echoed in the air as Tuco screamed after him, his voice swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert. Clint Eastwood never had to prove he was the best. The world already knew. And with that, he disappeared into the sunset. One last time.